So thank you for joining us. As I mentioned, this is being recorded. So if you need to come back to this a little bit later or you have to leave early or anything like that, this information will be available on our website. Again, my name is Angie Sosa. I'm the Associate Director for Off-Campus Engagement here at Tufts University. We want to welcome you to our campus. And we're here to share some information for you all in regards to living off campus. We have a lot of stuff that we're going to go through today. And so I want to make sure that folks know that the slides will be available along with the recording of this on our website. So you can always refer back to all of these things. We'll also have our contact information towards the end of this, and you're welcome to post questions in the Q&A. I will try my best to answer them as I can. Carol is helping us on the back end. Carol is with the families group here on campus, and she'll be able to kind of help with either answering some of the questions on the back end, or she'll help us with kind of listing what those questions are at the end. So we're going to jump into it because we do have a lot to get through today. But number one, some of the stuff that we're going to go over, we're going to talk about what type of resources we offer here in off-campus engagement. Off-campus engagement is a portion of residential life and learning. So for our students who have started off their process here at Tufts University, you would be living in on-campus housing for those first 2 years. For this group, you're coming in as transfer students. So you may come in as a sophomore student, you might come in as a junior or a senior. And so that might look a little bit different for you. So we're going to go over some ways to how you can still remain engaged, even though you don't necessarily have that on-campus living experience. With that, we're going to go over lots of important things: how to conduct your search, how to really consider your budget and financial aid, if that is something that you are needing to navigate. We'll go over some basic considerations on like how to find and vet roommates, things that you should consider when you're looking for an off-campus apartment, questions to ask, etc. And then we also know that we might have some non-local students. So whether that are international students or students who are coming from another state or anything like that further away, and how you might navigate this process from that angle. We've got a lot to go over. So like I said, these slides will be available as well as the recording. You can always refer back to it, and you can always reach out to us at a little bit later of the time if you have specific questions about your individual situation that we can help with. So number one, you might have come across our apartments.com partnered website. It's offcampus.tufts.edu. This is just a screenshot of what that looks like. Many of the colleges and universities in the area use this service, where apartments.com has kind of created a similar service to what they might normally have with their regular site, but this is specifically for our college students. And so in order to kind of access certain details here, such as the roommate section, which I'll go over, you do need to have a .edu email address that is registered with this site. You would sign in using your credentials. So here at Tufts, you would sign in using your Tufts credentials. That's the same information that you use to sign into internet or email address or anything like that. You are able to utilize this site just looking at housing, and some information may be available to you, such as phone numbers or anything like that. But in order to send messages through the site or even utilize the roommates section, you'll see at the top of that screen, there's like kind of a little roommates area here at the top. I'm not sure if folks can see my arrow, but that is something that you will need to be logged in. And that has, I'll go over that a little bit later, but it sets up a profile process where you can connect with other students, whether they're students at Tufts, students at other neighboring universities who are also looking for potential roommates or anything like that. So it really kind of opens and expands your process. We do have another process that will help you with searching for roommates, but I'll go over that a little bit later as well. So what we're here to help you with is with navigating a lot of different challenges. For example, coming in as a transfer student, you might not have a group of people that you know who you want to live with just yet. These are new people that you're meeting, living in new experiences, adjusting to being in a new space. Sometimes we try to be as upfront as possible with like, this is what my, I don't want to say requirements, but this is what my expectations are of living in this particular space. But sometimes having those conversations can be really challenging. So my office can help you with navigating mediations, conflict resolutions, having those tough conversations with your roommates, or even if you're having some issues with your landlord or your property management company, we can kind of help talk to you and talk you through some of those things. We are here to help you with navigating, looking for housing or subletting opportunities. We're not here to kind of just hand you the stuff. We can tell you kind of like where to look, but a lot of this is going to be on you. So we're here to really support you with what that process is going to look like. And then, of course, we want you to maintain being involved on campus while you're not living on campus. Most of our students are living on the periphery, mostly within a half a mile from campus, very walkable. If you haven't been to the campus already, it is a very walkable campus. We do have a lot of hills, I will say, but we are also surrounded by a lot of great transportation resources and anything like that. So that's why we're really here, is really to kind of help support you in that. So some right off the bat things that I want to make sure that students are aware with the off-campus housing search tips: don't send any money ahead of time. When I say that, I don't mean, you haven't sent, or you haven't found the place that you like and, or you found the place that you like and you're not sure if you should send the money. You should totally do that if you're interested in doing that. However, if you haven't seen the space, I want you to make sure that the space is actually real. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who do get caught in scams in this particular situation, and they will send money ahead of time, and they unfortunately won't get that money back. So we want to make sure that you're doing everything that you need to do your due diligence and looking for these spaces to really ensure that you're finding something that is real, that is going to be suitable for you and whoever your roommates are, etc. If you can see the space in person, it is highly recommended. So if that means that you're somewhat local, or you can come to the area, or perhaps maybe you have friends or family, or maybe a group that you're potentially living with, and maybe somebody is around here, having that person kind of serve as the point person to like seeing the space in person can be really important. With that said, that's not always possible. So I will go over some potential options around that in a few more slides. When you are meeting potential roommates, we want you to be clear about your expectations. What are those deal breakers? What are your finances looking like? General stuff like who's going to bring the microwave or something like that. And then also you should be prepared for unfurnished spaces. A lot of these spaces do not have furniture in them. Most of them actually don't have furniture in them. And if they do, they may be left over from a previous tenant, which may or may not be a good thing. So we want to ensure that you have that information. Things to consider when you're living off campus. It's a little bit different from living on campus. So if you've lived on campus before, you're typically here during an academic year, which is usually that end of August, September through May period of time. It's about a 9 or 10 month period of time with the summer off. When you're living off campus, most of the time that lease is going to be for a full year. That means January to December, or whatever date it starts to whatever date it ends. So that's something that you should really pay attention to, because it is often really difficult to try and find someone to sublet the space in those in-between months. With that said, those are things that you need to factor in when you're considering what your budget is going to look like. So that's a big thing that I want folks to recognize. There are some differences with the rental lease versus a license agreement. So when you're living in an on-campus situation, you'll have a license agreement. We're giving you license to utilize this space, utilize the furniture, et cetera, et cetera. There are going to be certain stipulations and prohibitions that you're not going to be able to do while you're living in that space. And whereas those things may exist to some extent when you're living in a lease, you're generally going to have a little bit more freedom there. You're going to bring in your own furniture. You're going to decorate your own, et cetera, et cetera. So those are things to keep in mind. Finances wise, when you're living on campus, most of the time that stuff is paid up front. Utilities are included, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have to deal with an internet bill, et cetera. When you're living off campus, a lot of that stuff is separated. And so you're going to be paying monthly. You're not going to be paying up front. And some people have done that. I don't recommend it. I say that specifically because I want to ensure that you understand, like, like, say for instance, something comes about and you are not interested in living in this space anymore. If you're able to get out of your lease, you don't want to have already prepaid everything up front. So that's kind of some things to kind of work through. And it's also going to help you with more budget management skills and all of that. So if that's an area that you need to work on, this is a really great place to try and learn how to do that. As far as utilities are going to be in the student's name. It's not going to be in everyone's name. It may be in one student's name, or maybe someone handles the gas bill, someone handles the electric bill, whatever situation you all have figured out. But that's going to be like kind of an added thing. So it's going to help you with kind of getting on a schedule, making those payments, etc. And then in terms of personal items, as I mentioned, you're probably going to be providing your own furniture. You may be responsible for loss or damages. So we highly recommend getting renter's insurance. To go along with that, chances are the apartment or the house that you are renting is going to have some level of homeowner's insurance. Those things are going to cover the physical structure of the house, maybe some appliances, the walls of the space, right? The renter's insurance is going to cover your television, your bed, your desk, all of those types of things. So it's really important that you see that. It's not that expensive. On average, you could potentially get renter's insurance for about $10 to $20 per month. Usually you'll get a discount if you pay it upfront, like a year in advance. If your family owns a home, they may have something that can be extended to you in your off-campus apartment situation. So that's something that you all should talk with your homeowner's insurance company about. But those are all possibilities. So we're going to jump into the financial side of things. One, I'm going to just give you a little bit of a breakdown of this page, and then I'm going to have Wenmo join us and go over some of the financial aid stuff. So typical stuff, range-wise, we're looking at around $1,000 to $1,400 per month per person, not including utilities. What I've been hearing from a lot of students has been we're in the $1,100, $1,200 on average. We give you that range because some things are on the lower end, some things are on the higher end. Utilities such as gas, electric, internet, water, if it's required, it's not required everywhere, but it is a possibility. We would estimate that it could be helpful to maybe have about $150, $200 a month per person to go towards those fees. Obviously, during the winter time, you're probably going to be using the heat a lot more than you would during the summertime. And so your gas bill might look a little bit higher. In the summertime, you're going to use the air conditioner. Your electric bill might look a little bit higher, so on and so forth. So those things can really fluctuate, and having that money set aside for that in particular will be helpful. Food, transportation, and personal items are all going to be variable depending on your particular needs. I would recommend potentially finding ways to budget appropriately. That could be, becoming a wholesale club member, splitting some of the costs on things that you all tend to use, such as toilet paper, paper towels, et cetera, et cetera. Some foods you can get in bulk, so that's really helpful. If you are seeking transportation, I would recommend against bringing a car, only because parking has always been really limited in the area. And especially if you're coming from out of state, your vehicle does need to be registered in the state of Massachusetts in order to qualify for a parking permit on the street. So I would recommend against it. You might as well save a few dollars by not bringing it. The other thing is parking, outside of street parking. Your house might not have a garage, it might not have a driveway, et cetera, et cetera. So those are all things that you're really going to have to consider. I would definitely make sure that you all take that into account when you're thinking about your budgeting. Some tips and tricks. You can call the utility companies ahead of time. You can call the company that services the gas or the electric in the apartment that you're interested in, just to get an estimate about what the average cost is per month. So that way, when you're figuring out, should I go $150 per month? Should I go $200? That gives you a little bit of an idea of what the general number is. They typically have that information because it always, it can fluctuate, but also like it tends to stay the same for most people. I'm going to pass it over to Wenmo. And Wenmo, just tell me next slide when you're ready. You're muted. Hold on 1 second. You're muted. You try talking.
That work? Can
There
you hear
you
me
go.
now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks, Angie. So now we're gonna get into the portion of the conversation about financial aid. So a common question that people have when they're thinking about living off campus is, what's gonna be different? So the first thing we're gonna start off with is what's gonna be the same. So the foundation of figuring out how much aid can be offered first is setting the cost of attendance. And so that is not different for someone living off campus. As you can see in this graphic, we still consider the tuition and fees, and we still consider housing and food, even if you're not going to be on campus or even using a meal plan. And then there's kind of miscellaneous out-of-pocket costs like books and supplies, personal expenses. So the cost of attendance is based on, and for housing and food, the first and second year on-campus room and the Tufts full meal plan, which is 3 meals a day meal plan. So even if you're living off campus, we're not going to have those, the fact that you need to eat and have someplace to stay cut out of the cost of attendance, which is really the starting point of figuring out aid. So that'll be the same. Then from the cost of attendance, we figure out from reviewing your aid application what the family contribution will be and subtract that from the cost. And then that's how we determine the financial need to set the aid package. And the award may include, depending on your eligibility, loan, work study, and grant aid. So that does not change. And we tell, tough students who are sophomores that who are living on campus, that if you are living off campus, you'd have the same exact aid decision result because we're using the same costs. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not like your aid will go down just because you're living off campus. Um, as I mentioned, the cost of attendance is not really based on your actual rent. It's not based on your actual cost. It's just using the average cost of a first or second year student room and the Tufts full meal plan. The other thing to keep in mind that is the cost of attendance is based on a 9 month academic year. A lot of them, we'll kind of get into that later. A lot of leases are 12 months, but we're strictly only allowed to consider the 9 month academic year. So that's something to keep in mind with the cost of attendance and why it's not really based on what your actual costs may be. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. So what changes? Well, the billing is different. So if you don't select a room, then Tufts won't bill you for a room. And sometimes people get a little confused because when they're reading their aid notification letter, they kind of think of that it's a bill, which it isn't. So yes, like I mentioned before, you'll have housing and food as part of your cost of attendance, but that's not the bill. So on the bill, the only way you get charged for a room by Tufts is if you went through the housing process and actually got a room assigned to you. So on the bill, the costs that you will pay directly to Tufts are going to be lower because there's not that room charge. And then often people who live off campus, instead of having a meal plan from Tufts, they may get a lower cost meal plan that has less meals per semester, or they may have no meal plan at all and just get food from grocery stores. So that's a difference. So in a comparison to someone who was living off campus before, if they have a similar aid package, if they're living off campus, their balance due to Tufts will be less. Now, any aid that is awarded will be applied to the charges on your bill. And so what you owe, that really depends on your individual personal aid package. So there is no universal aid for all students if they're living on campus or off campus. It's really based on the circumstances and the analysis of your aid application of your family. Now, in some cases, beyond having a lower balance, a student may have a level of aid because they're not getting charged certain items on Tufts bill, where their aid is actually higher than the charges that are due. Now, in those cases, they have what's called a credit, and they can request a refund through their student account after the semester starts and budget those costs to help pay the off-campus living expenses. Because when you're living off campus, that's another thing that changes. Now you're paying a landlord directly, you're buying food directly, you're paying utilities directly. And so Tufts doesn't give money to any of those parties. That's something that the students are responsible for. Now, sometimes the credit comes from aid, if that's your level of aid. And again, that's very individual. So, don't assume just, someone, a friend who, you kind of think has a similar family situation, perhaps it's not exactly the same, right? So you can't really compare. You have to look at your own situation. And sometimes a credit can come from just strictly financial aid. Sometimes people who borrow a loan, they can still borrow because the cost of attendance that's used as a framework for offering aid is the same. So they can borrow a loan and create a credit. So that's another option. And as I mentioned, refund requests, the billing office starts processing those requests that are submitted in your student account after the semester starts. Processing usually takes about 7 to 10 business days. So it's something to keep in mind just timing wise. There isn't like refunds in the summer. So that's something that you may need to consider when you're kind of planning. So yeah, so that's what changes. So let's go to the next slide. So when you're kind of going through your apartment search and kind of trying to figure out, well, how much can I afford? And we recommend using this formula. As I mentioned, the cost of attendance that we use based on 9 months. And that's for the upcoming 26-27 years. So you can see the housing costs that's used, divide that by nine, the food costs, divide that by nine. And so that comes out to about just under $2,300 a month. And so if you find living accommodations with not just the rent, but also utilities, foods, all those other costs, and it averages out to 2288 or less, then you're kind of in line with what it would be to live on campus. But and if it's lower, then you're ahead a little bit, but in that regard. So that's kind of a way to help plan. Now, obviously, keep in mind, like I mentioned before, rental leases are often for 12 months. So, you kind of have to think of how to pay the other 3 months of rent if they have a 12-month lease. Maybe there's subletting that's involved, paying from summer earnings. So those are things you kind of have to do in the planning as Angie alluded to before. And also considering some of these upfront costs. And I know it said, there may be up to four times the rent up front, not just first, last security, but also other fees. And, hopefully, there's kind of tips on how to maybe negotiate to kind of reduce those. But those are things to have to keep in mind because, again, financial aid is really just limited to looking at that 9 month actual academic period and not accounting for anything outside of that. So that's if you're doing a search and you're kind of looking at the all-encompassing monthly costs. If you keep it under 2288 per month, then you're in line with living on campus with a full meal plan. So yeah, thank you, Angie, and send it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Momo.
Mhm.
So in discussing whether or not you have that fourth month, hoping everybody can still hear me okay. Just put in my headphones really quick. That fourth month, it's not really the month, right? And you'll see on the screen right here that I mentioned that there's a new law in place in regards to brokers and agents here in Massachusetts. You might be wondering why would I be involved with a broker or an agent? Well, for one thing, in Massachusetts, this is something that is a part of the rental process. There are tending to be real estate agents or brokers who are involved with that rental process. So that means that a landlord could potentially ask a real estate agent to list their space, help them find tenants, etc. But that also means that you, as a potential tenant, could enlist a real estate agent to help you find an apartment. So that is something you should consider, especially if you're living a little bit further away. This is kind of that area that I was talking about a little bit earlier in regards to if you're not local and it's a little bit difficult, this might be something to consider. Now, as we were mentioning with those upfront fees, it could be up to 4 months in advance, or the worth of 4 months in advance. What that entails, you would be paying for your first month of rent. So say your lease starts in September 1st, you're paying for the month of September. That would mean your 12-month lease ends the following August. So you're paying your last month of rent, the following August. You might be paying a security deposit. Security deposit is what they use at the end of your tenancy to cover the cost of any damages or anything like that. That is oftentimes the amount of 1 month of rent. And then if you're working with a broker, or a real estate agent, you might be responsible for that fee. That's kind of a finder's fee, right? They're doing a lot of the work for you. And so this is just kind of the fee that they charge for doing that work. Now, with this particular slide, you'll see that in the state of Massachusetts, there have been some changes in the last year or so in regards to what that looks like. Essentially, what this means is that whomever creates the relationship with the real estate agent or the broker is the person that is responsible for paying that fee. So what that means is if you have signed a document saying that you're going to work with a real estate agent and they're going to help you find a place, you're going to be responsible for paying that fee. That fee could be whatever the cost of that first month of rent is. So you might find, a space that, for the 4 people living there, it's 4,000, meaning it's $1,000 per person. Or so $4,000 is the broker's fee that you would be responsible for paying for that person, for that broker. If the landlord is the person who has created that relationship with the broker, the landlord is responsible for it. So that is where kind of some of that difference is. Now, with that said, this also goes back into looking at to what is the cost that we're looking at in terms of what the rent is going to be. You saw that I had that range. It's about 1,000 to about 1,400. The reason that range exists is for various reasons. One, you could see some changes in terms of, what the setup of the apartment looks like. Was it recently renovated? Is it in, does it require certain gas or something like that, or the water bill or whatever the case is. There isn't anything that says that the landlord has to necessarily hold to a particular rate. So the landlord can really determine what rent they want to charge. So that is where that range tends to be. Typically, the landlords in the area are going to, compare against one another and what are you renting your space for? So mine is about the same size. I'll rent it for the same space. But they are also trying to account for needing to also cover that broker's fee. So that's where some of the prices might go up and down in terms of that. I will say, there are going to be a good number of people who are looking for spaces all over the greater Boston area. So use your discretion, make sure you're looking within your range, but also these things are negotiable. So you can always have conversations with the landlords to kind of figure out what the next steps are. Some tips for budgeting, just some things to kind of really consider. Furniture can be expensive. So we've got some cool resources that we can provide you or kind of point you in a direction of to finding some lower cost furniture. The MIT Furniture Exchange is a really cool project that they run over at MIT down in Cambridge. It's not too far away from us. And they sell furniture, but they sell furniture for lower cost. So you're going to be finding things at a much cheaper rate than you would to find brand new things. There are also going to be folks who may still have a Facebook page, or maybe your parents still have a Facebook page or anything like that. You can look into Everything Free pages. There are a lot of Everything Free pages in the various different communities. They do prefer that you live in that community in order to utilize that. But lots of folks are giving away furniture or giving away appliances or anything like that. And that can be really helpful for outfitting your space. Facebook Marketplace is also a good resource to utilize. Craigslist is also still popular, somewhat popular. So that is something, as I mentioned earlier, joining a wholesale club. So that way you can save some money on day-to-day items such as toiletries or food or anything like that. And then we recommend that you familiarize yourself with local resources, whether that is the food pantries or where the free food fridges are. Sign up for the Tufts free food e-list, and that's available through the Tufts mobile app. That way, lots of people are having events and might have extra food and they want to get rid of it tonight. And, you have class and you have no time to go make food. So why not go grab a sandwich that might be available there? That's a really good resource for a lot of people. So we definitely recommend keeping an eye out on that stuff. And then if you're able to, we definitely recommend looking for either an on-campus or an off-campus job. There are lots that are available and you can find those through Handshake. Handshake is a really great resource. You can see lots of things that are posted there. So you can even start looking as early as now. I know we just posted our job there as well. So for those students who might be interested in living off campus, we have a role. It's called the Jumbassador role. And there are people who are going to be really helping students who live off campus with acclimating to living off campus, with how to stay engaged, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a really cool way to remain involved. So as we mentioned, really understanding your monthly finances, things to keep in mind. You can take a screenshot of this, or you can wait until this kind of comes back out. I have thrown some general numbers up there in terms of the food, transportation, etc., because those things are really variable. But when you're thinking about like what this is going to cost for the year, you're looking at anywhere from about $13,000 to just over $21,000. It is fairly flexible dependent on what your particular need is. If you have a apartment with far more bedrooms, it's probably going to be cheaper person to person, but it's going to be higher because there's more people living there. And then you also have to consider in a situation like that, utility costs might be a little bit higher because more people are there utilizing the utilities. So things are going to balance out. And that's why, when I made a mention of, if you have a vehicle and you want to avoid bringing that vehicle or spending the additional money, that could be a benefit because that's money that could go elsewhere. So if you're ready to begin your search, where are some places you should look? Well, I've already mentioned our apartments.com page. That's just offcampus.tufts.edu. You can find a link on our website. We definitely have the link towards the end of this slide deck, and then you'll be able to get that a little bit later today or tomorrow. Facebook is still an option. Lots of people are finding things through word of mouth or Craigslist, Zillow, apartments.com. We also have a connection form, which you can find on the Tufts off-campus engagement page. There is a link to it where you can just kind of say, hey, I'm interested in finding people who might be interested in rooming with me. You fill out a brief survey to kind of ask you, okay, what's your budget? Do you have any specifications of what you're looking for in a roommate, etc. And then we're going to connect you with people. So we'll send you email addresses or put your name on an email list for people to connect with as potential need. And this is really useful for people who are looking for roommates, looking for people to sublet a room, looking for a sublet themselves, etc. So it's really helpful. At the end of the day, whatever option you use, whether it is Facebook, Craigslist, our site, our survey, we want to make sure that you are going into it as prepared as possible, that you are using your due diligence to ask as many questions as possible, because that's how you get through things. So when you're looking for a roommate, we want to make sure that, you're paying attention to certain things. It can be really easy to see someone's Instagram page, pop on there, see some things that you don't agree with, and automatically make that decision no. But we definitely encourage you to still get to know people. People surprise you, right? We definitely say it is important to consider people whose living practices may be similar to your own. That means, how do they keep their space? How do they like to use their space? Is it a study space? Is it a party space, et cetera, et cetera? Because those are things that can be really challenging for roommates. We want you to be clear with your expectations. What are things that you like? What are things that you are willing to negotiate on? What are things that you're not willing to negotiate on? And how do you have those compromises? And if it's difficult, sometimes you can't have all of those conversations up front, which is why we're here to kind of help you with mediating and having those conversations later on if it comes to that. And then we also recommend you try to get to know the person before, selecting them right away. It can feel really stressful. People might feel pressured into making a decision really quickly because they want to lock something in. And while we understand that, the challenge is that when you're living off campus, it's not the same as living on campus. If you needed a room change and we had a space that we could potentially move you to on campus, we're going to try our best to do that. When you're living off campus, getting out of your lease is not easy and it's really challenging. With that said, oops, give me 1 second, sorry. So we've got our Finding Roommates page, which is part of our offcampus.tufts.edu page. It is just here. You've seen the little circle pop up, roommates. Once you've logged in, you'll see my name is up here. So once you logged in, it'll bring you there. You can click on roommates and it'll bring up a bunch of people. I've already blocked out their information, but it'll bring up a bunch of people who may be looking for housing or looking for a roommate in that particular area. You can fill out the filters here. So that could be, I'm looking for people who are only going to Tufts University, or I'm looking for the fall semester, or I want someone who already has a space, those types of things. And you can sort through it. Once you found someone, it's going to bring you to their profile. And this is also something that you all will be able to fill out on your own, give a little bit of information about yourself, what you might be studying, et cetera, what your budget is. So that way you can try and find people this way. So we definitely recommend going ahead and filling that out. You can do that whenever you have the chance. Something that is also available on this page, and I've blocked out a couple of things just because it had some personal details, but this top box here may have a phone number if the person has chosen to share that. So that way you can call them, you can text them. But there's also this message section. So if you wanted to leave a message, send a message and you press send message, is going to send to the email address that they have on file, which is likely their university email. So that's really helpful as well. And that's a way to connect with students. As I mentioned, having tough conversations are really important, whether they are conversations, with yourself, with your friends, your family, who may be very involved in the process. Something that I like to ensure that folks understand is our parents might be there to help us through this process. They have our best interest at heart, but also parents, your child is the person that's living in this situation, right? So we want to encourage them to be as independent as possible and really making those decisions, but helping each other kind of understand like where those boundaries are can be really beneficial. Something to add in there, maybe you do have a friend that is going to the school and it's your best friend, but best friends don't always make the best roommates. So we want to make sure that you understand that as well. Don't make that decision just because they are your best friend. That is something that can be challenging. And as I mentioned earlier, if you have to leave an off-campus apartment, it's not very easy to do that. It can be very expensive. So we urge you to use discretion when you're choosing your housemates because a lot of times that tends to be the reason people want to leave. If you're a non-local student, as I mentioned, looking for a potential group of people who might have a space that they're looking to fill, or maybe a group of people who are looking to find a space together, those are all really important things. So we definitely recommend that to you. We also recommend the possibility of utilizing a real estate agent or a broker. Even though it is an additional fee that you would be responsible for, it can take a lot of stress off, especially if you're not nearby. There's someone who can be a good resource for you. They can do video chats with you, show spaces to you, and they can answer a lot of questions about different spaces for you during that process. If you're an international student, that's another challenging thing to really consider. Some of the stuff that a lot of people might need who are domestic students, you might not have access to, such as a social security number. A lot of times that information is requested so that a credit history or a background check can be done to ensure that you're going to be a suitable tenant. That is something that just generally happens. If you are an international student who has had an on-campus work study job, you may have been issued a social security number because of that needing to get paid and pay taxes, et cetera, et cetera. That is what that information is also able to be used for. You can show your I-20 from the International Center if you choose to. That is a personal document. That is completely your discretion. Sometimes it has been helpful for people, so we do like to mention that. You also are encouraged to chat with the International Center. They may have some other resources that they can assist you with, but it is just kind of something that can be beneficial. Actually, to go along with this, on our page, you will see that one of the filters may have something that says like, this is a great resource for international students, et cetera. Perhaps it's a landlord or a real estate agent who has experience working with that group, so they kind of know how to navigate it a little bit better. So that can be really beneficial as well. Proof of income, that can look different for a lot of different people. That could be, here's my paycheck stub to show that I have money. Here's a copy of my savings balance statement to see that I have money in here. Or here's my financial aid statement to show that I'm getting money to be able to cover this. Those are ways to really show that you are able to actually afford living in the space, and those are going to be helpful as well. Residency verification is something you can get from either Residential Life, our team, if you've lived here before, or if you have lived on campus at a previous place or from a previous landlord. Those are all details that you can get. Essentially, they just want to make sure that, like, hey, other landlord, have you ever had an experience, a negative experience with this potential student, or how, what are some challenges that you may have dealt with and how can we work around that? And then proof of enrollment. Proof of enrollment you should be able to get through student services. That's just literally what it says. It's proving that you are enrolled here at the university. So that way they know, okay, this is a person who is going to the school. I've got that, confidence, et cetera, et cetera. During your search, you're going to want to do your best to ensure you've done everything that you can. You're going to want to consider questions that you want to ask the prospective landlord, a property manager, or a leasing agent. There are certain things that you're going to want to look for when you're completing your in-person apartment search, so things that you want to look around for. And then also considering various costs. We spent a long time during this webinar really going over the cost, but I want to go over some of the other things that you will need to consider. And so again, this is a very wordy slide, but this will be available to come back to. So feel free to screenshot it, or you can come back to this. This is slide 22 of 31 if anybody needs that information. But some potential questions that you might want to ask a landlord or anything during your search is generally, what are the costs? What are the things that are included in the costs? What are the upfront costs? As we mentioned, that could be up to the amount of 4 months worth of rent costs, right? But you can negotiate that. Sometimes a landlord might not have the broker's fee associated, or they may not have a security deposit associated, or maybe they just want first month's rent and the security deposit. There's a lot of different things you can work with, but you can also negotiate those things. And so those are things you want to make sure that you have clarity on, that they're listed in your lease, etc. What is the landlord's preferred method of payment? There are a lot of different ways. In the past, money order, check, personal check would have been great, etc. But there's a lot of online systems now too. A lot of people are using Venmo or using Zelle or doing just like a general transfer. Ask what the landlord prefers. If you are to give cash at any point, you want to make sure you get a receipt. The positive things with all those electronic versions or anything like that or paper trail is that there is a paper trail. So if something were to come up to say that you didn't pay your rent this month, you will have proof. Yes, I did. Look, I paid my rent. Here it is. It went to you. So those are things that you want to ensure that you have clear with your landlord, excuse me. Asking about utilities, what are included, what's your responsibility versus the landlord's responsibility. If you're going to need to sublet at some point in your tenancy, what does that process look like? Sometimes the landlord wants to be more involved in that. How are emergencies and maintenance managed? Is there somebody who's on call? What's their process? Do they have like a company that they work with or anything like that? Are there any stipulations that you should be aware of or restrictions on the space that you need to be aware of? Like, yes, there is a basement, but we don't recommend going into it. Or there's a garage, but you can't use it. Those are things that you want to know so you don't accidentally do that, right? And then you want to know what are the general stuff. If I wanted to renew my lease, what does that look like? When does that happen? And if I wanted to cancel my lease, like say I signed the lease for 12 months and it's not working out for whatever reason, is there a termination process? Sometimes you will have to pay a little bit extra in order to get out of the lease, but those are all things that you can talk about. And then at the very end, after the year is up, what is the preferred process for moving out? What are your landlord's expectations about what that process will look like? We send a lot of newsletters. We're going to be sending monthly newsletters to students who live off campus. That way they kind of know like, hey, this is a great time to start asking this question. These are some typical things that you might want to consider. So we definitely recommend that. But also these questions are really good starter points to push into the further conversation. When you're viewing an apartment, you want to make sure that the general condition of the apartment is good to go. So you want to make sure that you're looking at around what are the spaces that I know I need. I need a bedroom, I need a kitchen, I need a bathroom, maybe a living room. If I have chose to bring my car, I need a parking space, etc. Those are things I know I need. But you also want to walk around and kind of pay attention to other things. Look at the walls. Do you see bubbling? Do you see staining that could look like potential water damage? Is there signs of mold? Anything like that? You want to pay attention to the ease of use of certain things, such as is the toilet flushing okay? Do the door handles work? Anything like that? Does it get stuck? Is there a history of an issue with this? And that way you can ask those questions in that moment. You also want to pay attention to main areas for egress. So like ways to get out of a space in case of emergency, windows, doorways, etc. Do the locks work correctly? Do the handles work correctly, etc. And then also signs of pests. Obviously, those are things. This is just a few things that you can consider. We definitely recommend doing some research and kind of finding more information, but these are really good places. And then in terms of the general neighborhood, are there grocery stores nearby? Are there restaurants nearby? Is laundry in the building, or do you need to do laundry off campus? Like, what does that process look like? I've already mentioned parking a couple of times. In the wintertime, we get a lot of snow from time to time. So who's responsible for shoveling that? Who cuts the grass, etc.? Those are a lot of questions that you want to ask, and we want to make sure that you think of those things ahead of time, have those conversations ready to go with the landlords. So we've already mentioned a lot of the money things: first, last month rent, security deposit, broker fee, moving costs, if that's necessary. Do you have to ship things across the country, or do you have to purchase things ahead of time? Furniture expenses, are you going to need to buy things, or will you be able to find things a little bit less expensive, etc.? So these are all things that we think it's really important to start, keeping in mind as you're going through it. It is 6:15. We're about 40-ish, 49 or so minutes into this. I've got about 6 more slides that I'm going to finish up. And then if you've got any questions, I just want to reiterate, please feel free to put those in the Q&A. Carol can answer some things, and then she's going to help me towards the end if we have time to answer some additional questions. Understanding your lease. So this is what happens like once you get that lease, what are the things that you want to make sure that you are paying attention to? Now, we're here to help you navigate and support you during that process, but we're not legal professionals. So we can't actually go and sit through the lease with you and highlight this and underline this. Those are things we can't do. However, what I can do is I can put you in a place to kind of know what are some things that I know should be in my lease. For one, everybody needs to be named. So if you and your three roommates are going to be living in the space, all four of you need to be listed on that lease. Okay. If someone is missing, they may not be covered by some of the terms within that lease. And so that's really important. You want to ensure that the landlord or the property manager or whatever the LLC that is responsible for this space is listed on that document. That way, you know who is responsible for the management of this space. You want to know who do you contact in case of emergencies? Are you contacting the landlord or the property manager? Is there a maintenance person that you contact? It should list what's the period of time that you're going to be utilizing this space, September to August, or it's only a 9-month lease, so it's going to be September to May. Okay, and those are things you want spelled out. It's also going to say what's the cost, how much money per month, what day do you have to pay, what's the method of payment. Those are all things you want to be very clear, because if there's any discrepancy later on, you want to be able to go back to the document and say, this says this, and that's how I did it, and now there's an issue, and how do we resolve, right? It should also clarify the utilities. If it's not clarified, those are questions you want to ask. And then a lot of leases will have an extra section towards the end called an addendum. The addendum has other random things that might be associated with that apartment that might not necessarily be associated with every apartment. So every apartment needs to be able to provide you with a suitable living space. It should have electricity, have running water, et cetera, et cetera. That should be in every lease. But not every apartment or every house is going to have a garage. So if it has a garage, that's something that would be noted in the addendum or anything like that. And if the landlord says, I don't want you to use the garage, that would be noted in the addendum, et cetera, et cetera. Some stuff that may be included in this process, it could be a security deposit information, that could be a documentation. If you give a security deposit, you have to give, it has to be put in an interest-bearing account. So the landlord has to put that money aside in an account. It accrues money over the course of the year. That money is yours. And the only way they can take from it is if there's additional charges that have to come out towards the end of your tenancy. So that's something to keep in mind. You might also have a statement of condition. So that's essentially the landlord has walked the space and they said all the walls were great, et cetera, et cetera. Just because you receive that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it yourself. And this is kind of to double check and make sure everybody has information, right? So you want to make sure that you have those details as well. You share that information with your landlord, you share that information with everybody in the house, so that way everybody has all the information. And as I've mentioned, renter's insurance is a really, really good thing to have. It's very low cost. Multiple people can go on it. So it's not going to be everybody has to pay $20 a month. It might be everybody shares a $20 bill a month, et cetera. So those are things to really consider along that process. We're almost done. As I've mentioned, you want to do a full walkthrough of that apartment as soon as you've received your keys, photograph any and all damages, take notes of all issues, email that information to your landlord, send them the photos, copy all the residents in the house. You want to ensure that everybody has this information. So something to note there is it's possible that not everybody is going to move in at the same time. And that's totally fine. The first person who moves in, it would be great if they did you a solid and they actually walk through those spaces. Because if there's a significant amount of time between when they moved in and when you moved in, those are things that you don't want to like, well, this could have happened during that period of time and you're still responsible for the costs, et cetera, right? So we want to ensure that there is some understanding there. You're going to take your measurements as you need. Say you have a really great couch that you want to bring in, but it's not going to fit in the living room, or it's not going to get through the doorway. Make sure that you do those things beforehand, because it can really be expensive to kind of get those things through the next process along there. Make sure everyone has a copy of the lease. Reread your lease, make sure you're familiar with it, ask your landlord or your leasing agent or the real estate agent that you're working with for any follow-up questions or anything that you may not understand. And of course, renter's insurance, I can't say it more than enough. While you're here on campus, there are ways to remain engaged. There's lots of student organizations and clubs throughout campus life. We've got off-campus engagement newsletters where we'll be sharing tips and tricks. We've also got our Instagram pages, so you can follow us at Tufts underscore off campus, or our residential life page at Tufts ORLL, where we'll have a lot of really helpful information, and we'll be advertising things that are happening on campus or around campus or anything like that. We will also be doing programs. The cities and the neighborhoods surrounding Tufts are going to be doing lots of events and whatnot. And so you should really be exploring your areas and getting to know the people around you. And then, of course, while you're here, you're still going to have access to lots of different resources such as health and wellness. You'll have access to dining meal plans if you so choose to have so. You'll have access to health services and counseling and mental health services, and also our colleagues over in student support and student life. So if you ever need anything, there's a lot of resources here. We've got your back. We're here to help you along the way. We've got our last slide here with some resources and contacts. A lot of this stuff you should be able to just Google search off-campus housing website or residential life at Tufts University, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of cool things to find. You can contact us at offcampusinfo@tufts.edu. And then we've got some campus partners there as well. As I mentioned several times, this slide is going to be available. And so these links will be clickable. And we've also got our folks over in financial aid listed there as well. Student services at tufts.edu, and a phone number where they can be reached as well. Wenmo, do you have anything additional that you think could be beneficial for this group?
Yeah, just kind of highlighting again that everyone's financial aid or financial situation is different. So if you have questions about your specific situation, like Angie said, that financial aid link, it takes you to our financial aid living off campus website. So it has a lot of the details that we talked about and other things. It even has a chart about what stays the same and what's different. But if you have questions about your specific situation, you can get in touch with student services and they can connect you to your aid counselor if you want to go through your individual circumstances.
Awesome. Great. Carol, I don't know if we've got any questions that we might have from the chat that could be beneficial.
There is a question about timing.
Great.
When to start looking, especially if you've selected to go onto the wait list, and you're waiting to hear about the potential for on-campus housing.
Sure. So that's a great question. I recommend looking now. And I recommend looking now because you never know, how long you're going to be on that wait list. Lots of people are on the wait list. Some people are able to find alternative housing, but they don't always come off. And so if they haven't come off the wait list and that hasn't then moved you along, it can be really challenging and put you in a challenging situation. So we want to make sure that you're doing everything you can. So in terms of a timeline, I would recommend starting to look now to at least start to familiarize yourself with it. Look at it as a plan B, but don't wait forever for plan B. We want you to get started as quickly as possible. I believe that the folks who oversee the on-campus housing, those are some of my colleagues in the office, are going to be sending some updates from time to time in terms of what that wait list looks like, but I can't guarantee the frequency of what that's going to look like. And we don't want you to wait too long in order to find something. So we want to ensure that you're able to kind of get that stuff kind of handled as soon as possible. At this point, we're about 2 months or so away. This is the perfect time to start looking. In the real world, lots of times people are signing leases about a month in advance. So this is the perfect time to start looking and start putting those things into practice. Awesome. I am going to request we stop our recording at this point.